All right. So that's enough for announcements. Let's get started with today's discussion. My name is Jason Brett, and today we are all in on validating priorities. We've got a fantastic roundtable discussion. And for those of you who haven't been part of one of our roundtable discussions before, this is not strictly a panel in the strictest sense of the world, in the strictest sense of the word. We've got a group of seasoned expert product managers and product professionals who have come together to talk about how they go about validating the priorities that they've identified. Over the last month, we've been talking about prioritization frameworks. We've been talking about communicating priorities in your organization. And today we're going to talk about the validation of those priorities that you've identified. Is my roadmap really the right roadmap? How am I sure that that's the case? And how do I build that in as a continuous process? So our primary moderator here today is Holly Jewell. She and I will be tag teaming it a little bit. And we've also got to welcome, you met Andy a few moments ago from Method, Andy Pohl. Many of you know our good friend Matt Bettina, Director of Product Management at Civics. We've also got our friend Devin Smith, a big sponsor of ProductCamp this last year. And Alex Sherman back, who's been here almost from the very beginning as well, who is now Principal Product Coach at Kaiser Permanente. We are glad to have you all here. So I'm going to let Holly tee up the discussion this morning. So let's get started. Thanks, everybody, and welcome.
Thanks so much, Jason. And yes, we have an amazing group of folks. I'm super excited to have this cast of characters, as it were, as our roundtable. It's almost as good as the original one, right? And that led to a whole, empire. So, great things can come from this. So welcome, guys. And I'm super excited. So what today's session, was about, we've all been talking about it, right, for a while. And that's why we have our November theme on priorities, because as budgets get slashed, as all these end of the year troubles come into play, and as we're just looking at 2024 planning, for me, for Product Coffee, as well as for you corporately, it's what are the priorities, right? And how do we make sure we're focused on the right things? And one of the things that very much leads to, we talked about prioritization frameworks. We talked about last week, Jerry did an excellent talk on communicating priorities, which apparently was focused on cats. And we have one coming to join us now. But this week we were talking about validating priorities, right? So we all know when you come up with your priorities, you should probably validate them. Make sure you're not just in an ivory tower, doing a thing by yourself with your token cat. And, that's all you did to validate it. Hey, does it sound good to you? Does it have the right focus? And the cat's like, well, if it'll pay for some fancy feast, sounds good to me. We're all good here. So we know that, right? We got to go vet this around our organization. And we want to talk about not just some ways to do that the first time, though, but really the focus, from this session is about how do we go on doing that continuously, right? How do we convert that iterative, we know to do it when we create a priority. So we know, well, if we just newly created priorities, we should go validate, but how do we turn that validation into a continuous process? How do we go back consistently and make sure that these were the right things, but are they still the right things? Because the world is changing, as many people on this call point out, every day. So with that, I am going to toss the ball first to my good friend, Alex, who I'm also very excited to see for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, so happy to speak to this. I was just working with a team on something similar yesterday. So maybe I'll give like a little background, and I'm not allowed to say too much because Kaiser's just weird about that, right? So I'll do my best. But I was working with a team, it was just a couple days ago, and they've got a list of things that they're supposed to build throughout X amount of time. We'll just call it that. And so they had the next opportunity that they could work on. Now, the question was, when did they decide to actually work on this? It was probably a year or so ago. A lot has changed. And so I posed some questions to them. I had them do a brain dump around, what do you know about the customer that's related to this opportunity today? What do we know about the opportunity that's related to this today? So just generate assumptions. And how do we know we're successful? And as people started to generate things, some really good questions came up, such as, is this even a problem still? And so we stopped there before we even had them go into doing more discovery, like go talk to people or test out a solution, which some of them wanted to. We asked the question to them, like, what what do we need to draw a line in the sand of to let us know that this is still a problem? So I gave him I was like, here's what you need to do. Go ahead and see how many people are impacted by this. Go do some research, go figure out how many people are actually impacted by this, because they couldn't answer that at that point, which I would rather have had them already do that, but that's okay, things change. And so they went back a couple days later, they got the information, they got the data that let them know it's not a huge problem. It's at least not right now. So the fact that they were able to say no, they invalidated a thing for now was huge, because oftentimes teams will just blindly build the next thing in their backlog for no reason. And so I thought that was a good example of them like taking the time to do that and actually stopping and pressing to say, hey, let's maybe not do that. And I just made the space for them more than anything else. So that, I think that's a real example that just happened.
That's awesome, Alex. Thanks for sharing that. I'm gonna ask if anyone else on the roundtable wants to comment on that. Have you done something similar, or did that give you a thought? I'll just let anyone who wants to jump in.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that, yeah, I agree 100% with what Alex was just saying, and something that we would be sure when we communicated to our various stakeholders, internal and external, as we share those priorities on a very regular basis, by the way, just like the roadmap and everything else, okay? But we explain how we got there. And in the case of a previous role I had, it was sharing some detailed survey results that we got from a broad survey to our client base. And so they said these 5 things were top, and here's our plans, our priorities, our roadmap, executing on those things. So that helps, I think, set the stage for further discussion. Are these still the priorities? Have things changed, right? But also showing that we didn't just pull these out of the air, right? Here's how we got to where we are, and let's make sure we, again, have credibility in that. Again, the flexibility to change, but making sure that we communicate how we got here and why we're here, and then what we're going to do exactly to solve for those problems in the first place. So I think that's key as well, to have credibility in those discussions. But again, it goes back to last week's discussion: communicate, and make it accessible along the way, as well as a feedback loop and input. Actually, I like that. I like the term again from last week too. The input loop around that as well is key. So that's a couple of things. I'll pause for others, certainly.
I love that, Andrew. I mean, totally agree with both points on that. I mean, I think that's super important, what you were really hitting too, about the having something that you take in that conversation, right? Whether it's the first time or you're going back, showing this is how we got to the priorities. This is what we think are the priorities. This is how we got there, why we got there, why we think these are the right things, is so critical to the conversation. And I think even more so sometimes when you're coming back around, because something that I've seen, if you're not maybe presenting it just the right way, is this is a positive thing. You're coming back to revet, right, with the leadership or the stakeholders, these are still the right things. But if you're not coming into that with a bunch of, good stuff to show the work and show why you're having that conversation, it almost creates a sense of doubt. I heard a leader in a hallway once, and a name shall be left out to protect the very much not innocent, but that was basically mocking that product person because the product person did not show that picture very well in that conversation, did not have artifacts, for lack of a better word, to represent that, just maybe some speak and some words. And so with the leader, of course, we all know leaders aren't really paying attention in many meetings. They're on their phone, they're doing a thing. God only knows. Maybe it's a tea time. They're working out with their buddies. I don't know, figuring out which scotch to buy, what's older, seems to be a thing. But anyway, like they're working on that, right? And they didn't really listen. They heard every 5th word. And what they walked away with was, basically I now doubt this person's abilities, leadership, competence, because they're coming back checking stuff with me, and I'm like, why are you not confident in yourself? Why you got to check with me every 5 minutes, 6 months, but still, right? So I think that's super important, to your point, right, that we're putting something in there that helps with that. I see a hand up. I'm gonna let Rob jump in here.
Yeah, I want to add to what you're saying. And again, I just got off a call where I was doing this. It's so important to have the right story to tell for those executives, for exactly what you're saying. They only hear what they want to hear. What's in it for me? What is important? And so you have to have that. And then if you can tell the right story, you can tell them why it's important to them, then you can help them with the why story, right? and help them to say, here's what the priorities are. This is why the priorities are important. Or you can help them say, your priorities are maybe they're too narrow or they're too broad. And you help them to understand why that is the case, so that you're saving them from themselves, and you're protecting everybody, and you're becoming that trusted advisor. Because really, at the end of the day, that's what we are, right? We're trusted advisors to the executives for making the final decision. We don't want to be the ones that are not communicating appropriately and not giving them exactly what they need, even if that means 3 bullets, right? You give them how they can actually pick it up, so that they're doing what you want them to do. They can take credit for it, but we've got to make sure that we're careful in how we communicate it.
Right. Thank you, Rod. I totally agree. And I love that. Yes. Trusted advisor, right, is what we want to be. And what you said, even, is really more important sometimes when you're telling a leader why not to do their idea. Right. But Matt, you had your hand up and you are next. So come on in here. What you got?
All right. Nice and toasty in here. So I really like what Alex said about the questions. Just starting that dialogue can be difficult. Where do you begin? So I think that if you, one of the things you can do to take a unique position is be the person in the room that challenges everyone to think. And sometimes that can be a difficult thing for some people to step into that position and maybe seem uncomfortable. But I really like the question that Jeff Guthelf asks, which is, what will people be doing differently if we succeed? That's exactly the question that I asked of our team when we met to, as you said, Holly, revalidate, are we going the right direction here? And I think that's especially important with respect to what Devin said earlier about you're on the cusp of a change here. You're going to launch a new product. We need to be thinking big and thinking about what defines success for our customers. Not only what will our customers be doing differently if we succeed, but how. And what that led to was actually a very interesting dialogue around what our customers are doing today in terms of just their business functions, what they're doing today with our product, and what they'll be doing differently going forward if we're successful with it. And it ties directly into the outcomes-based approach that John Mansour, Product Management University, takes as well. It will start to uncover those outcomes and start to help you understand from your customer base what is it they're trying to achieve. And if they're doing this differently, this is how they're going to be doing it differently and what they're going to be doing to achieve those outcomes. So just starting with those questions, as Alex said, and poking and prodding a bit, to get some responses is a great way to start to ground yourself in terms of validating priorities. Are we moving in that direction of how people do things in a positive way that sets us apart from our competition?
I love it, Matt. I totally agree. That's all great stuff. I mean, you really just, are so right about how you got to approach that. But Devin, I see your hand, so I'm going to let you jump in here.
Sure. Yeah. And so many great things said here so far. I think that the one of the big things that I've seen over the past year or so is I've actually had the opportunity to see a client, a company using ShapeUp. So that is very different from Scrum. They are still following, as far as agile philosophy goes, they're following agile philosophy, but as far as their method of getting work done, they're using ShapeUp. And so for those who don't really know what that is, it was developed by 37 Signals, the folks behind Basecamp, et cetera. And instead of doing 2-week sprints, what they do is they have 6-week product increments. with a 2-week cool down in between. And instead of saying, we are, like we've got these things in the backlog and we're just going to tackle them, you have your product managers are looking at, they're looking at, what do we need to do in order to move the product forward? They're working on actually shaping what those things look like, and leadership has to decide what they're going to bet on. There's a whole concept of pitching and betting. Leadership has to decide what they're willing to take that 6-week bet on. And so leadership is involved. And one of the things that I've seen that is absolutely fantastic is that validation is happening because the business is getting involved in what we're going to spend the next month and a half on, because it's not just a 2-week sprint. It's all right, we're going to commit to something. We're willing to invest resources for the next month and a half. This is going to give us more time to actually get real work done. But it's also going to be a short enough time frame for us to not overcommit resources. And so, when that 6 weeks is coming up, we have, looked at things and talked about what we're trying to take to market. We've had research that has impacted what goes into the next product increment, but there's this constant validation that goes into when they're deciding what goes into that next product increment. And I think that it is a good middle ground between, and honestly, I'd say it's not, I shouldn't even call it a middle ground. I think it's close to what Scrum is trying to achieve, but I think it's doing it in a better way. And it gets the business involved in deciding where the resources are going to go. And they're doing a good job of deciding, hey, this is the feedback we're getting from customers. This is what our strategic objectives are. Here's where we need to be in 6 to 12 months. What are we putting in this next product increment that's going to help us get there? And they're doing a great job of evaluating all of the different variables to decide what goes into that product increment. So I would say that, I don't want anybody to forget the things that have been said before, because I think you still have to be cognizant of all of those things. You have to be reminding people of strategic objectives. You have to be making sure that you're validating what you're actually going to do with how it's going to change life for the customer, and evaluating how your company is going to support that thing once it goes live, right? But the big thing I think that I'm trying to say is, look at your underlying systems of getting work done, because you can build that validation, that continuous validation, into the very systems that you use to do work.
I think that's a great point, Devin. I think as we're trying to talk to this about how to get to a continuous process, right? We're talking about tools and things you need to take with you into the conversation. When we talk about the how, it has to be built into your process. And so whether that's shape up or anything else, I mean, to your point, it's just a different vision of Scrum in a way. But however your team is working, right? There's no one right way, but this has to be part of that process, right? Where there's a trigger and the product team is doing this, and it's just part of the process. It's got to be natural, where it's not oh no, we come screeching to a brick wall and revalidate, right? John, what you got to say?
Yeah. So, imagine the first part of this discussion not having any features in the discussion, right? So the simplest form of a product strategy is this: over the next, well, let's say 12 months. Over the next 12 months, we're going to help our customers get better at these jobs. Here's the outcomes and the value to the customer. And then here's what it brings back to us in terms of, revenue, adoption, retention, whatever. Okay. So that's the strategy. As you're communicating priorities, and then you're getting this into your backlogs and your sprints, the conversation is, okay, the next priority is this job, right? Remind people why that job is important, why the customers have trouble with it. And then that's going to be the next thing, or these jobs are the next thing on the priority list, right? And I love what you're saying, Devin, about the different ways to get that through. But, the factory can get it through however it operates. But I think keeping people focused on, listen, we said this is what we're going to do over the last 12 months. These things are still valid in terms of value to us, value to the customer. Here's how we're moving the needle on that strategy, right? We've already done the things to improve these 2 jobs. Here's the outcomes customers are getting. Here's what it's doing for us. Here are the next things in the hopper. Keep moving. and just
Yeah, I
keep
think-
the conversation at a value level, because I think, especially when it comes to strategy and priorities, once you start getting into features and the minutia of that, the discussion just goes off the rails.
100% agree. That I've seen that almost every time. When you start talking about features, then people have pet features. They've got projects that they want done, and we're no longer talking about strategic objectives. We're not talking about what's good for the company. We're just trying to get our pet thing into the current sprint, the PI, whatever it is.
Exactly. And I love what you both said, and others here already about that, right? But when you and Eric said in the chat, was talking about North Stars and OKRs. And I think, like, from a product perspective, your priorities have to tie to those things. So talking about, as we have here, about what you take back into the conversation, resetting with that and saying, this is still our North Star, right? And here's why. And then these are our strategic objectives and our OKRs to that. And this is why. And then here's how and show that here's how our priorities tie into it. And I love what you just said, John, because leaders forget, right? Time is wibbly wobbly, and we don't all have the best memories, right? So, here's what we said we were going to do. Here's what we've done so far. Here's what's left to do. And if that did change, if your product team rightfully did change some things along the way, show that. We in Q1 we said these were the right things, and we did 3 out of those 5. I mean, there were these 2 left, but we now don't believe these 2 are the most important and are the right things. And here's why we're picking these other 2, right? When you're going in that discussion, I think that's super important and a really good way to tie it back together. But I love what you were saying, John, about like showing that progression. And again, talking about the value and the outcomes. I would never, just to jump on the bandwagon there, never want to get into a feature conversation, whether we're talking about leaders here or just other stakeholders, because to your point, everyone has their pet, and why does it really matter, right? It should be about the outcome, about the priorities, about the thing that we're accomplishing, not, did we make the button blue? And then an open discussion for which shade of blue it could be. Yes, Matt.
I was going to add to how do we continuously validate? One thing I encourage my team to do, and that I've done myself, is just start trying some things out. Okay. And don't just head off in any direction, but think about what you've heard from the business, from your customers, from just the market research that you're doing. Pull those things together and start feeling out the signals. Start feeling what is making me really curious about what I've heard from customers. And for me, it was about, okay, I'm seeing some lack of structure in how they go about their data collection and so forth. And so that led to a hypothesis: using more structure in select areas of the customer's data capture will lead to improved quality and reporting, but also information transparency with leadership. So taking it up a level, as John mentioned, from the day-to-day sort of field workers to the people that are actually making and help them answer questions that they can't answer. So it started with, well, all right, here's a concept for a simple self-service tool. We can enable you to put some more into what you do with your data capture. And we did some simple front-end work here with a commonly used utility in the product. And we also did some back-end work too to experiment there to see how do the folks who are behind the back office respond to this. And then add on to that with some stakeholder engagement and transformation work in understanding their business, how this adding of the structure is going to help them, and see how they respond to that as firsthand. And then we layered on some reporting and data analytics on top of that to show them what they're getting out of getting this added structure, and started to share that story to our customers. And I learned that this is really starting to catch on. And so move this into a design then for the new product, and how can we start to introduce structure in other aspects of the business of what they're doing and these products. And so by doing that experimentation though with an existing product, we were able to take a lower risk approach to it and do some continuous validation over time, several years, to see how many customers respond to this well, and what are they saying about it, and do we feel this thing really has legs, and then just grow it from there. But you continue to share that back, to the customers, to the business, and you don't stop the process until you're really seeing some solid results. So I think that's one way, is just to find something you feel curious about, something that gives you that itch, or that gives you that feeling that I want to pull that thread a little more, like a cat. I'm just curious about that. I want to pull that thread and see where it leads me. And yeah, I think you'll find in many cases that it could lead to something fruitful, something valuable.
I love it, Matt, not just for the cat reference, obviously, and it's so true. Right. It's so true. But the experimenting, I mean, I said in the chat, like, that is validating. And I love it so much, because when we talk about validating, we're often focused on going back and having a verbal discussion and validating with someone with head nods. It's a body language, right? But it's a verbal thing. But, many of you know a soapbox that I'm on, with the group. I'm very involved with the cog bias guys, but we are all biased, and it's really hard to get truly accurate responses from people, whether it's because we bias them by the things we say or just who we are, right? I have very many friends right here on this Zoom call, and I believe a lot of you, and maybe I'm biased in thinking this, but I think that if I called up Jerry and I was like, hey, I have this great idea, let me tell you about it, and then I tell him the worst idea in the history of ever, Jerry's probably like, yeah, no, that sounds cool. Yeah, here's some things I would think about, but yeah, you're onto something, right? Because he likes me, he's my friend. So, we have to think about that. But when you start experimenting, like you were talking about, Matt, like, there's truth in that. Like, if you're actually doing the thing, and that gives you something really tangible that you can take to these conversations we're talking about with others to say, why do we think they're the right things? So I'm going to give it to Andy, and then Jason, you had your hand up and it went down, but we'll go to you right after Andy.
Okay, thanks. Something else I was thinking about as we were talking about discussing with stakeholders and going through that is spend some time thinking about what that stakeholder or those stakeholders are going to say or object, or, after a while, you're going to have an idea, at least some of the things they're going to say about their pet features, their projects, right? Things like that. You can't anticipate everything, but if you spend some time at least preparing for what are they going to say, and then what kind of questions, like Alex was mentioning earlier, what kind of questions am I going to ask to dig into those? Is this worth more than this? And our client said this, and again, not being argumentative, but being ready as best you can. There's always going to be unanticipated questions, right? But if at least you're ready for the ones they're going to ask about, that gets you a little bit further ahead too. And back to the basics of product management, in the sense of bringing in an architect or developer with you whenever possible. It's so much easier these days with our virtual meetings, right? Bring them along for the ride, and that will help in many different ways, perhaps in the discussion, but certainly later on when they know what you heard exactly, and they can help a lot with that. It was helping evangelize that and relating themselves to what that stakeholder, group stakeholders said.
I love it. Jason?
Yeah, I was just going to come back into the testing and experimentation conversation. I think we've kind of hit that one pretty hard. But when it comes to validating when it comes to that kind of concept of validation, there's the internal stakeholders, and what I'm also really interested in focusing on is making sure that we're validating externally. We got a lot of experts that care inside the organization, but understanding that what we are building or what we are planning to do is actually going to really solve and address the needs of our customers in the timely way that they need to, and that's where that real balancing act is for me. So I was talking, and Kim, I don't want to, I'll let you tell as much of your own story as you want to, but I was talking to Kim earlier today, and we were talking about the notion of understanding that we have a business outcome that we have to achieve. And we formed an internal hypothesis. Kim and her experience, they had formed an internal hypothesis about how to get to that outcome for their customers. And they put together some sample content and went and shared that with customers and got really positive responses that it was going to take them in the direction they needed to go. And it was through that real customer-facing experimentation with very real live content and data. And earlier in the networking portion of the call, we were talking about the trade-off between getting everything sorted out and having confidence that what you're going to deliver is the right thing before you ship it so that you don't waste a whole bunch of time, versus the quick iteration MVP. How can I get something in front of a customer quickly in order to confirm that I'm going in the right direction? And since the trade-off is, it is a constant trade-off, and we have to keep both in mind. But when validating, there needs to be a very intentional, explicit approach to getting that roadmap, getting those priorities, getting those opportunities in front of customers, and using that as part of the data that feeds back to the leadership team to help them understand why we're going the way we're going.
So true, Jason. It's and for the things that I'm working on right now, and I'm watching the thread, and like what John had said, for me, a lot of this has to do with what is the challenge or the problem or the opportunity that the end consumer needs, because I'm in a particular B2B2C space, and everybody thinks they have great ideas, and that's wonderful, but we have to be thinking about it in terms of, that's a great idea for you. Does that help the end consumer, or does it make it harder? And so always flipping that conversation around and saying, that's a great idea. Now, what would that look like to the person who's doing this for the first time? Are they going to understand the words? Are they going to be frustrated after having to click through 17 screens on their phone? Those are the sorts of things that are so important. And a lot of times they forget about it because they're like, well, I have to get this done because it's going to bring in X million in revenue, or it's going to save us this much in operational costs. Like, that's okay. That's a yes and conversation, not a yes but conversation. And again, it's all about how do we tell it in terms that they will understand, so that they feel heard and they don't go and cause these emergencies. And we can actually make them understand that it's this can be a solve for a lot of different groups. That's so important.
Sorry, Rob. Yeah, I totally agree. And I'll tie what you just said, and thank you for that, into what Matt was talking about with experimenting, right? And what Jerry, you just said in the chat about, some low cost experimentation. A lot of things, it can be done very, reasonably cheaply, right? Low effort, because you don't often need a lot of fans. But exactly to your point, I mean, everyone thinks they've got great ideas, myself included, certainly Jason. But every executive thinks they have great ideas. I have a great story from my past, and he's still a very good friend today. He's a CIO, CTO at many tech companies, and he had a great idea, he thought, and he literally called it Blue Sky Project and tried to divert most of my dev team to work on it because he was so sure this was huge and every customer was going to want this and it was going to be amazing. And once I found out about it, I realized, right, there's me, product leader for a division, but there's him over the whole company. So, you go with the politics and go, I'm going to need some big guns, right? If I'm going to go convince him that this is the right call, and I no longer carry my Colt 45. So, and I decided that in a parking lot was probably a wrong call anyway. So anyway, long story short, I did what Jerry's suggesting, and I went and met with them, was like, hey, and went in non-hostile and like, hey, I'd like to understand what your Blue Sky is, why we think this is important. Okay, well, why don't, I understand you. I hear you when you say all the customers will want it. I'm not sure I'm convinced, but let's go find out. That's my job, is to find out for you, right? So let's go build a low cost prototype of what it is that you're thinking. And let's together go into this conversation with like our top, 50 customers, or some customers that we have a good trust level with, because this was something big. We didn't want to it's kind of secret. It's kind of awesome, right? So we went and did that. And then lo and behold, all the customers did the slow head turn and we're just kind of like looking at me and we're going, I don't know why we would want that, but okay, I guess it's cool. Because they kind of like Brian, again, biased. They're like, oh, we like you, but this seems really special. So, right. And that was how we had to have that discussion, right? So the experimentation was so key to be able to go out there and do that validation in a way that was effective, and really to drive that difficult conversation, so he could see it's not me being crazy or me being like, I don't like your idea because it's not my idea. It's the market really isn't going to support this. The customers really don't want this. Andy, I think I saw your hand flash.
No, it was an applause, what you were saying. But yeah, the power of the not just visuals, but the rapid, low cost prototyping that we can do these days, really brings things to life. And I love the way you effectively killed that idea without malice and without a nasty competition. But let's get in front of the customers and let's share that with them. Yeah, and then it takes care of itself. So
Yeah, and to Jason's point earlier about the external validation. So we're at a pivotal point, or have been for some time now, going from a legacy product to a new product. There's a lot of risk involved, especially given just the circumstances. And to get that external validation, you can certainly do your one-on-ones. You need to, that provides a certain atmosphere for your customers to share feedback. But we also made the decision to build in public. So we launched a monthly series with our customers and started to show them what we're doing and get their input and solicit their feedback, knowing that we're all very busy today. We all don't have time for that extra meeting. So let's just all get together and have one big happy family conversation about what we're doing. So that has been at times touch and go, but it's overall been beneficial to our efforts to make sure that we're in sync with the customer base and that we're moving in the right direction. As much as we hesitated to and deliberated over it, I think it's been a good thing overall to build in public with them, and it shows our commitment to them. So just wanted to add that 2 cents there. Ching.
I love it. Devin, I think your hand was up before Jason, so I'll let you go first.
Oh man, no, he's not gonna like
Also
me.
for time, you can handle it for a while, so you should go.
I think that's awesome, Matt. What you were talking about, Holly, what you said about how you've handled that, and it all goes back to getting in front of customers, right? Essentially pointing everybody back to, hey, what is going to deliver value for the customer? That's essentially the underlying principle there. And if when I have people talk about, hey, we should put this in a product, or we should do this, or we should do that, that's one of my first questions is, okay, how is that delivering value for the customer, and are we sure this is the best thing, right? That's just the mental model that I try to get everybody to look at it with, and that's not to say that you're not going to have multiple people come with things that they think are going to deliver value for the customer, and they may even come with data. They may come and back it up, right? I remember we were trying to launch, move from a legacy product to a product on a modern tech stack. We had to support massive customers on the legacy product, and there were I was driving hard to try to get us to off of the legacy product so that we could get those major customers off of that legacy product. But I remember when I had people come to me and basically say, hey, look, we've got 2 major customers who are threatening to end their contracts if we don't fix this thing soon. And I'm like, what is the thing? And it was something that was brought up in a meeting that person didn't raise the alarms as much as the real problem was. But after the fact, somebody came up and they're like, look, man, I know, you're trying to launch new hotness. You're trying to bring us to new sexy. But if we don't fix this thing in the next 6 months, we're going to lose 2 major customers. And that won the day. We had to make the trade-off. All right, we're just going to have to push the launch. No, people know that this is coming, but we're not going to lose any customers if we don't launch the new product in 6 months. That's not going to happen. We need to keep these so that we have an opportunity to launch a new product with a healthy company.
I love it. That's going to be my new byline. There's the new sexy. There's the old sexy. There's the new sexy. Like, that was awesome. Thank you, Devin. John, why don't you jump in?
Thank you. So, Matt, very refreshing to hear you talk about building with customers. And I think one of the very few downsides of the short sprints, 2 and 3 week sprints, is you don't have the time for those customer interactions. So back when I was a product manager, we didn't call it Agile back then, but we were doing 6-week sprints. And within those 6-week sprints, now keep in mind, before we got into the sprints, we knew the customer job, the outcome they wanted, the obstacles, right? So this was more of design validation, right? So we would work from the user backward. We would design these things with our customers, like you say, publicly. And we got, probably 70 to 80% of it right, but it was that 20 or 30% of those little small things, the gotchas that they really sort of elevated up. And it would be from an okay product to like, now it works great. And I think we have gotten away from that because the agile sprints are so short, that we're designing stuff and then it's customers don't like this or that, or we have to redo it, and we get into all these things. If you get your customers involved in the design, you're going to spend more time up front, and then it's going to accelerate on the back end. The overall time frame won't change. I can tell you that from my experience.
Sure. And, I do want to pose a question here. What are some ways that you separate the signal from the noise when you are building in public or when you're working with your customers? Because I think, to take the Millennium Falcon Star Wars analogy here, there's a lot of asteroids out there, and you got to find that sweet spot to get through.
Yeah, that's a great point, Matt. Jason, your hand was up. Do you want to jump in here? Speak to what Matt just said, or whatever you were originally going to speak to.
Well, let's pursue Matt's thread for a moment, and if we have time at the end, I'll come back to it because it's a drop back to an earlier part of the conversation.
Gotcha.
Can you restate Matt's question real quick? I already forgot what it was.
How do you sort through all the stuff we're telling you to really find the true value in it? That golden needle in the haystack.
Oh man, that's good. I think, again, you've got a lot of competing priorities that come up. Like we talked about earlier, I think strategic objectives, being able to look at those, that's got to be, in my opinion, the first filter. And hopefully those strategic objectives are based on delivering actual customer value, because I've had it where we weren't really thinking about that. We set some objectives and they were really all about how we were going to make money and not really how we were going to deliver value to the customer. So that's a thing too. You got to watch out for that. But filtering, like, okay, we're going to measure this against the jobs that we know that the customer wants done, our strategic objectives. And honestly, I've never been in a situation where if we went through those two filters, what needed to be done didn't become clear. It's usually when one of those two filters is not in place that there's muddiness, in my opinion.
Spot on, Devin and Matt. What I will tell you is, when we used to do this with our customers, the first thing they would prioritize would be the jobs most in need of improvement in their department, right? And so we always came back to that. It's like, if you could only improve one job in your department, what would it be? And you'd be amazed at how those things filtered out, right? So then once we understood the jobs, then how we eliminate the obstacles with features and design and all that was the second part of the discussion. But to me, it always came back to that to cut out the noise, right? And since we had a quorum of customers, like usually somewhere between 12 to 20 customers who are involved in this, customers are the great equalizer, right? Because people are going to come in with ideas and it's like, okay, well, is that going to help customers get this outcome better than the things we're working on? And it was pretty easy to figure out whether that was a yes or a no.
Yeah, I love that, John. Especially, what you said too, Devin, about strategic objectives. We're going through that today now. Just having defined a vision for where we're headed with this thing that we call Airport IQ, which we did recently in the last 2 to 3 months since Tadera was formed, which is our new company. And building on that with a strategy to give us a solid foundation that we can fall back on to, litmus test those things from, and the information that we're getting from our customers to say, okay, do we feel this aligns with it or not? And I think that having the leadership team involved in crafting that was especially always important, but especially now they understand more when you point back to that vision and that strategy. They help to build it, they write it, they help to craft it. And when you say no, not at this time, and point back to it and say here's why, your argument's a little bit stronger, and they're a little more understanding of why we might not do that at this time.
Totally.
That's good, man.
I'll just, add on to that. Like all of us are more, things are more effective and for us to grasp when we're a part of them, right? We learn by doing, on some level. Every single human being, we experience things differently when we're hands-on or when we're a part of it, as well as obviously there's an emotional connection to it. We've talked about, engaging your team, making sure your dev team is bought into things before you're presenting it as any kind of product strategy or prioritization, or your roadmap. If your roadmap doesn't have those people's buy-in, it's really not a roadmap. And part of that is because not just the obvious, like it's grounded in some reality, not like how big Holly thinks, the t-shirt swag is for these epics, which could be very off base given my coding skills. But also it's political, subconsciously political, right? In the sense of if we're a part of something, we're going to present things very differently down the line, even if that gets shot all to holes, right? The world goes crazy, leadership has emergencies, or we get, questioned on why is that the plan, right? With some level of corporate hostility, right? If your partners in crime were part of it, if your stakeholders or your leadership, to your point, Matt, were a part of it, it's going to be very different, right? Versus if it was, well, I don't know, Matt came and talked to me in the room and I agreed at the time, but I was shaking my head the whole time going, no, I don't think this guy knows what he's doing, right? If you're involved in the process of getting there, that's very, very different later. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, there's always going to be, twists and turns and forks in the road. And just make sure, you're not using that fork in the road to eat with. Okay, bring your own fork, because that thing's been sitting in the dirt all day.
Yep.
You need to choose what you consume in terms of the information and the food and so forth that's put in front of you. And I think if you, analogy to a diet, if you have a diet established, that just kind of helps you to filter that stuff much easier. The decision making becomes easier at that point as far as what you're going to consume. Much like when you have a good vision and strategy, here's what we're going to take on. That's in alignment with that. Sorry, Jason, you're going to.
Nope, that's all right. We are at 1 minute past the hour, so it is time to close the discussion. I want to thank all of our roundtable participants for being here. Holly, thanks for moderating and hosting such a great discussion. And we will see you folks, hopefully see you on Friday at the workshop, where we're going to actually continue this part of the discussion to a great degree, because ultimately validating your priorities and getting your priorities straight comes down to having a very clear understanding of what the underlying reason for every priority is. And that's what we'll be talking about in the workshop on Friday with the strategic prioritization framework, the 60-second business case. So hope to see you there. And thanks again, everybody. Have a great week.